The morning rush hour buzzed with its usual chaos as Maya stepped onto the crowded subway car, her violin case clutched tightly against her chest. The 22-year-old music student had been riding this same train for 3 years, but today felt different somehow. The weight of her upcoming audition for the city orchestra pressed heavily on her mind, and her fingers unconsciously tapped out scales against the case's worn leather surface. As the train lurched forward, Maya found herself standing near a middle-aged man who seemed oddly familiar. He sat quietly in the corner seat, his weathered hands folded over a small notebook, occasionally glancing up at the other passengers with kind, observant eyes. Something about his gentle demeanor reminded her of someone, though she couldn't place who. His graying hair was neatly combed, and despite his simple clothing, there was an elegance about him that caught her attention. The man noticed her violin case and smiled warmly. "Musicians always carry their hearts in those cases," he said softly, his voice carrying a hint of an accent she couldn't identify. Maya looked up, surprised by the comment, and found herself drawn into conversation with this stranger who seemed to understand something fundamental about her passion. "I have an audition today," Maya admitted, feeling compelled to share with this gentle stranger. "I've been preparing for months, but I still feel like something's missing from my performance." The man nodded thoughtfully. His eyes held a depth that suggested he had experienced similar moments of artistic vulnerability. "Music isn't just about perfect technique," he replied, his gaze distant yet focused. "The most beautiful performances come from understanding the story behind the notes. Every piece has a soul, a history that connects the composer to the performer, to the audience." Maya found herself hanging on his every word, feeling as though this stranger was sharing secrets she had been searching for throughout her musical education. As the train continued its journey through the underground tunnels, the man began to hum, a melody that sent shivers down Maya's spine. It was hauntingly beautiful, filled with longing and love, yet tinged with an inexplicable sadness. The tune seemed to wrap around her heart, stirring emotions she couldn't name. Other passengers continued their morning routines, oblivious to the magic happening in their small corner of the subway car. "That melody," Maya whispered, her voice barely audible above the train's rhythmic clatter. "It's beautiful. Did you write it?" The man's expression shifted subtly, a shadow of something deeper crossing his features. He looked at her with an intensity that made her feel as though he was seeing something she couldn't understand. "It's a lullaby," he said quietly, his voice carrying years of unspoken emotion. "I wrote it long ago for someone very precious to me, someone I lost touch with when life became complicated." Maya felt her heart skip, sensing the profound sadness beneath his words. There was something about the way he spoke that suggested this wasn't just any ordinary loss. The train began to slow as they approached Maya's station. She realized with sudden reluctance that their conversation was about to end. This stranger had somehow touched something deep within her artistic soul, offering wisdom she hadn't expected to find on an ordinary Tuesday morning. The melody he had hummed continued to echo in her mind, weaving itself into her consciousness. "I hope you find what you're looking for in your music," the man said as Maya prepared to leave. His words carried a weight that suggested he understood her search for artistic truth went deeper than just today's audition. "Remember, the most powerful performances come from the heart, not from perfect execution of notes on a page." As Maya stepped onto the platform, she turned back one last time to see the man watching her through the window. Their eyes met for a brief moment, and she felt an inexplicable connection, as though invisible threads were binding them together across the space between train and platform. The melody he had shared continued to play in her mind as the train pulled away, carrying the mysterious stranger deeper into the city's underground network. Walking toward the conservatory, Maya couldn't shake the feeling that their meeting was more than coincidence. The man's words about music, carrying stories and connections, resonated deeply with her own artistic struggles. She had always felt that something was missing from her understanding of music, some crucial piece that would unlock her full potential as a performer. The lullaby he had hummed seemed to unlock something within her, a door to emotions she had kept carefully guarded. As she climbed the steps to the conservatory building, Maya found herself humming the melody, surprised by how naturally it flowed from her lips. It felt familiar in a way that defied explanation, as though she had known it all her life. In the practice room, Maya opened her violin case with trembling hands. The morning's encounter had left her feeling raw and open, vulnerable in a way that both frightened and excited her. She lifted her violin and began to tune it, but found herself thinking about the stranger's words about finding the story behind the notes. As she drew the bow across the strings, Maya attempted to recreate the melody the man had hummed. The notes flowed from her violin with surprising ease, as though the instrument itself remembered the tune. The sound filled the small practice room with an emotion so pure and heartbreaking that tears began to form in her eyes. Something profound had shifted within her during that brief subway encounter. The stranger's wisdom about music coming from the heart rather than technical perfection suddenly made perfect sense. Maya realized that she had been approaching her art with her mind rather than her soul, focusing on accuracy rather than authentic expression. The audition that had seemed so daunting just how 3 weeks had passed since Maya's encounter with the mysterious stranger on the subway. But the melody he had hummed remained constant in her thoughts. The audition had gone better than she could have imagined, with the judges commenting on the emotional depth she had brought to her performance. She knew the stranger's wisdom about playing from the heart had transformed her music, though she still couldn't explain the profound connection she had felt to his lullaby. Maya had begun taking the same train every morning, hoping to encounter the gentleman again. She wanted to thank him for the advice that had changed her musical perspective, but more than that, she felt drawn to learn more about the story behind that haunting melody. Each day brought disappointment as she scanned the faces of fellow passengers, searching for the kind eyes and weathered hands that had offered such unexpected wisdom. On this particular morning, Maya noticed an elderly woman sitting across from where the stranger had been. The woman's silver hair caught the fluorescent light, and she wore a knowing expression that suggested she had observed Maya's daily ritual of searching the subway car. When their eyes met, the woman smiled gently and gestured for Maya to sit beside her. "You've been looking for someone," the woman said softly, her voice carrying the warmth of someone accustomed to offering comfort. "The man who sits in the corner seat sometimes. I've seen you searching for him." Maya felt her cheeks flush, embarrassed that her hope had been so transparent, yet grateful to find someone who might have information about the stranger. "He helped me with something important," Maya explained, clutching her violin case. "I wanted to thank him, but I haven't seen him since." The elderly woman nodded with understanding that suggested she knew more about the man than she initially revealed. Her eyes held the same depth Maya had noticed in the stranger, a quality that spoke of experiences that had taught profound lessons about life. "David comes and goes," the woman said, and Maya's heart skipped at finally learning the stranger's name. "He's a music teacher at the community center downtown. Has been for 20 years, ever since." The woman paused, her expression growing thoughtful and slightly sad. "Well, since he needed to start over, he's helped many young musicians find their way." Maya felt excitement and curiosity surge through her. David was a music teacher, which explained his insights about performance and emotional connection. But the woman's pause and the sadness that had crossed her features suggested there was more to his story, something that had required him to start over. Maya sensed this was connected to the precious person he had mentioned, the one for whom he had written the lullaby. "The community center on 5th Street?" Maya asked, already planning to visit after her classes. The woman nodded, then reached into her purse and pulled out a small piece of paper. She wrote down an address and handed it to Maya, her movements deliberate and meaningful. "He teaches there Tuesday and Thursday evenings," the woman explained. "But dear, be gentle with him. David carries a heavy heart, and sometimes kindness can unlock doors that have been closed for a very long time," suggesting that Maya's search for the stranger might lead to discoveries she wasn't prepared for. That Thursday evening, Maya found herself standing outside the community center, nervous energy coursing through her body. The building was modest, its brick facade weathered by years of service to the neighborhood. Through the windows, She could hear the sound of various instruments being practiced, creating a symphony of learning that filled the air with hopeful determination. Inside, Maya followed the sound of a violin down a narrow hallway lined with photographs of student performances and community events. The music was beautiful, technically proficient, but lacking the emotional depth that David had spoken about during their subway conversation. Maya recognized the difference immediately, understanding now what he had meant about the importance of connecting heart to performance. She found David in a small classroom, working with a teenage boy who was struggling with a particularly challenging passage. David's patience was evident in his gentle corrections and encouraging words. Maya watched from the doorway as he demonstrated proper bowing technique, his own skill obvious despite his humble demeanor. When he played, even the simple scales carried the emotional weight that Maya had heard in his hummed lullaby. When the lesson ended and the student packed up his instrument, David noticed Maya standing in the doorway. Recognition flickered across his features, followed by surprise and something that looked like cautious pleasure. He seemed genuinely happy to see her, though she detected a wariness that hadn't been present during their casual subway encounter. "The young violinist from the train," David said, his voice carrying the same warmth she remembered. "How did your audition go?" Maya felt relief that he remembered their conversation and seemed pleased by her unexpected visit. She entered the classroom, feeling the nervous energy that had been building throughout the day. "It went well, thanks to your advice," Maya replied, settling into one of the plastic chairs that surrounded the room. "I wanted to thank you. What you said about playing from the heart, it changed everything for me." David's expression softened with genuine pleasure at her words, though Maya noticed he seemed to be studying her face with unusual intensity. As they talked about music and performance, Maya found herself sharing more personal details about her musical journey. She told David about growing up without knowing her father, how music had become her way of processing emotions she couldn't otherwise express. She mentioned her adoptive mother's support and the scholarships that had made her education possible. David listened with an attention that went beyond polite interest. His questions were thoughtful and specific, drawing out details about her childhood and musical development that most people wouldn't think to ask. Maya noticed that his hands trembled slightly when she mentioned certain dates and places, though she couldn't understand why her story seemed to affect him so deeply. "That lullaby you hummed on the train," Maya said, during a pause in their conversation. "Could you play it again? It's been in my head for weeks, but I can't quite remember all the notes." David's expression shifted dramatically, color draining from his face as though she had touched on something painful yet precious. With shaking hands, David picked up his violin. As he began to play the melody, the room filled with music so beautiful and heartbreaking that Maya felt tears spring to her eyes. The lullaby was more complex than she had remembered, filled with layers of love and longing that spoke of profound loss and enduring hope. "I wrote this 23 years ago," David said quietly when he finished playing. "For my daughter, before circumstances forced me to give her up for adoption. I was young, struggling. Thought I was making the right choice for her future." His voice broke slightly as he continued. "I named her Maya, after the month she was born." The world seemed to stop spinning as Maya processed David's words. The violin case slipped from her hands, clattering to the floor as the impossible truth began to dawn on her. The stranger who had offered such profound wisdom about music, whose lullaby had unlocked something deep within her heart, was claiming to be her father. "That's impossible," Maya whispered, though even as she spoke, pieces began falling into place. The familiar feeling she had experienced upon meeting David, the way his melody had felt like coming home, the intensity with which he had listened to her story. Her adoptive mother had always been vague about the details of her adoption, saying only that her birth father had been a musician who couldn't care for a child. David set down his violin and pulled out his wallet with trembling hands. From it, he extracted a small, worn photograph of a baby girl, no more than a few months old. The baby wore a tiny pink outfit and had the same dark eyes and serious expression that Maya saw in her own childhood photographs. "I've carried this picture every day For 23 years, David said, his voice thick with emotion. I wrote that lullaby the night before I signed the adoption papers. I used to play it and imagine that somehow, wherever you were, you might hear it and know that your father loved you. Maya stared at the photograph, seeing her own infant face, looking back at her from across the decades. The room felt too small to contain the magnitude of what was happening. Maya's mind raced as she tried to process the incredible coincidence that had brought them together on a subway train, without either of them knowing their true connection. The mysterious pull she had felt toward David, the way his wisdom had resonated so deeply, suddenly made perfect sense. Why? Maya asked, her voice barely audible. Why did you give me up? David's face crumpled with the weight of old pain and regret. He sat heavily in the chair across from her, looking older than his years as he prepared to share the story he had carried alone for over 2 decades. I was 19, barely making enough money to feed myself, David began, his words careful and measured. Your mother had died in childbirth, and I was alone with a baby I adored but couldn't properly care for. The social worker convinced me that adoption would give you opportunities I never could. I thought I was being selfless, giving you a chance at a better life. Maya felt anger and sympathy warring within her chest. Part of her wanted to rage at the young man who had given her away, while another part understood the impossible position he. The silence in the community center classroom stretched between Maya and David, heavy with 23 years of separation and the stunning revelation of their connection. Maya stared at the worn photograph of herself as a baby, trying to reconcile the stranger who had offered subway wisdom with the father she had wondered about her entire life. The lullaby that had so profoundly affected her musical understanding now carried entirely new meaning, transformed from beautiful melody to message of love across an impossible divide. I need time to process this, Maya said finally, her voice steady despite the emotional storm raging within her. David nodded with understanding, carefully returning the photograph to his wallet. His movements were slow and deliberate, as though he was afraid that sudden gestures might shatter the fragile moment they were sharing. Of course, David replied, his own voice thick with barely contained emotion. I've had 23 years to live with this knowledge. You've had 23 minutes. He wrote his phone number on a piece of paper and placed it on the table between them. If you ever want to talk or ask questions, or even if you just want to tell me to leave you alone, I'll understand. Maya picked up her violin case, her mind swirling with questions she wasn't ready to ask. The man before her was no longer just the wise stranger who had helped her find musical truth, but the birth father whose absence had shaped her entire life. She needed space to sort through the complex emotions threatening to overwhelm her carefully constructed sense of self. Over the following weeks, Maya found herself unable to focus on anything else. Her violin practice suffered as she wrestled with feelings she couldn't name. Anger mixed with curiosity. Resentment battled with understanding. And beneath it all flowed a current of longing she had never acknowledged. She called her adoptive mother, Sarah, and shared the incredible story of her accidental reunion with David. Sarah listened with patience and wisdom, offering the same unconditional support she had provided throughout Maya's life. I always knew this day might come, Sarah said gently. I hoped it would. Actually, I could see in your music that you were searching for something I couldn't give you. Maybe David can help you find that missing piece. The conversation with Sarah helped Maya realize that her feelings about finding David didn't diminish the love and gratitude she felt for her adoptive family. Sarah had been her mother in every way that mattered, providing the stability and opportunities that had shaped her into the person she had become. David's presence in her life didn't threaten that bond, but offered the possibility of understanding another piece of herself. Maya began researching David's life, learning about his journey from the struggling teenager who had given up his daughter to the respected music teacher he had become. She discovered that he had earned his teaching degree while working multiple jobs, that he had never married or had other children, and that he had dedicated his life to helping young musicians find their artistic voices. The community center displayed testimonials from dozens of students whose lives had been changed by David's patient guidance and musical wisdom. 3 weeks after their reunion, Maya called the number David had given her. Her hands trembled as she dialed, unsure what she wanted to say, but knowing she needed to hear his voice. When David answered, she could hear the surprise and hope in his greeting, carefully controlled, but unmistakably present. "I've been thinking about what you said," Maya began, her words carefully chosen. "About music, carrying stories, and connections. I think I understand better now what you meant." David's sharp intake of breath was audible through the phone, and Maya could imagine him sitting very still, afraid to hope for more than she was ready to give. "I'd like to learn more about the story behind the lullaby," Maya continued. "About you, about my mother, about why you made the choices you did. But I need you to understand that this doesn't mean I'm ready to call you Dad or pretend the last 23 years didn't happen." "I understand completely," David replied, and Maya could hear the tears in his voice. "Whatever you're comfortable with, however much or little you want to know, I'm grateful for any connection you're willing to share." His humility and respect for her boundaries helped ease some of Maya's anxiety about moving forward. They began meeting weekly at a coffee shop near the conservatory, neutral territory that felt safe for both of them. David shared stories about Maya's birth mother, Elena, describing her beauty and kindness, her love of literature, and her dreams of becoming a teacher. Maya learned that Elena had been David's first love, that they had been planning to marry when the unexpected pregnancy complicated their young lives. "Elena would have loved to see the woman you've become," David said during one of their coffee conversations. "She would have been so proud of your musical gift. She used to say that music was the language the heart spoke when words weren't enough." Maya felt a complex mix of sadness and gratitude, hearing about the mother she would never know, understanding that Elena's death had shaped David's decision as much as his youth and poverty. As the weeks passed, Maya found herself looking forward to their conversations. David proved to be an excellent storyteller, painting pictures of his and Elena's courtship, their hopes and dreams, and the devastating grief that had followed Elena's death. Maya began to understand that giving her up for adoption hadn't been an easy choice, but a heartbreaking decision made by a grieving teenager who wanted the best possible life for his daughter. Maya also discovered that David had continued composing music throughout the years, though he had never pursued performance or publication. He wrote primarily instrumental pieces, often inspired by his memories of Elena or his hopes for Maya's future. When he shyly offered to play some of his compositions, Maya was amazed by their beauty and emotional depth. His music carried the same quality that had drawn her to his lullaby, stories told through melody rather than words. "Would you like to learn some of these pieces?" David asked during one of their meetings. "I wrote several with violin in mind, imagining what you might sound like as you grew older." Maya felt her heart skip at the offer, recognizing it as David's way of sharing more of himself, while respecting her need to control the pace of their relationship. Playing David's compositions became a bridge between them, allowing them to communicate through music when words felt inadequate. Maya discovered that his musical style complemented her own artistic sensibilities, as though they shared an innate understanding of how emotion should be translated into sound. She found herself incorporating elements of his compositional approach into her own practice, feeling her musical voice grow stronger and more authentic. The other students and faculty at the conservatory noticed the change in Maya's playing. Her performances carried new depth and confidence, a quality that suggested she had found something she hadn't known she was missing. Maya realized that reconnecting with David hadn't just given her answers about her origins, but had unlocked a more profound understanding of her artistic identity. 6 months after their reunion, Maya invited David to attend her graduate recital. It would be the first time he had heard her perform in a formal setting, and Maya felt nervous about sharing this important moment with him. She had chosen to include one of David's compositions in her program, a piece he had written called "Letter to My Daughter" that she had adapted for solo violin. The night of the recital, Maya spotted David in the audience, sitting quietly in the back row with tears already streaming down his cheeks. Sarah was there too, having insisted on meeting the man who had given her the daughter she loved. The two of them spoke quietly before the performance, and Maya watched from backstage, as they seemed to find common ground in their shared love for her. When Maya played David's composition, the auditorium fell completely silent. The piece was heartbreakingly beautiful, filled with all the love and longing David had carried for 23 years. Maya poured her own emotions into the performance, playing not just the notes he had written but the story of their separation and reunion, the complex journey that had brought them back together through the serendipity of a subway encounter. After the recital, David approached her with shaking hands and eyes bright with pride and joy. "Elena would have been so proud," he whispered, his voice breaking with emotion. "You played our love story, yours and mine and hers, better than I ever could have imagined." Maya felt tears of her own as she embraced this man who was learning to be her father, understanding finally that love could survive separation and flourish even after years of silence. In the months that followed, Maya and David continued building their relationship slowly and carefully. They never tried to pretend that he could replace the years they had lost or that their connection was simple. Instead, they created something new, a bond based on mutual respect, shared musical passion, and the recognition that family could take many forms. Maya kept taking the same subway train each morning, though now it held different meaning. Instead of searching for a mysterious stranger, she rode with the knowledge that sometimes the most important encounters happen when we least expect them. The lullaby David had hummed that first morning continued to play in her heart, no longer a beautiful mystery but a love song that had finally found its way home. David often joined her on the morning train, and they would sit together in comfortable conversation or companionable silence. Other passengers occasionally noticed the obvious connection between the middle-aged music teacher and the young woman with the violin case, but they couldn't know the extraordinary story of separation and reunion that had brought them together. "Music really does carry stories," Maya said to David one morning as their train pulled into her station. "The most important ones find their way to the people who need to hear them, even if it takes 23 years. David smiled, understanding that his daughter had learned the deepest truth about music not from formal education but from living the melody of their own remarkable story. As Maya stepped onto the platform that morning, she turned back to wave at David through the window, just as she had done months earlier, when he was still a stranger. But now the invisible threads connecting them were visible, strong, and growing stronger with each shared melody and each day of their carefully rebuilt relationship. The subway song had become their family anthem, a reminder that love could survive any distance and that sometimes the most profound connections happen in the most ordinary places. Had been placed in. She thought of her adoptive mother, who had indeed provided her with love, education, and opportunities. The life she had lived had been good, even if it had always carried the shadow of unanswered questions about her origins. "I never stopped wondering about you," David continued, his eyes fixed on the photograph in his hands. "I followed your adoptive family from a distance for a few years, just to make sure you were safe and happy. When I saw you thriving, I forced myself to stay away. I thought my presence would only complicate your life." Maya realized that David had been living with his own form of loss and longing, carrying the weight of his decision every day. RS earlier now felt like an opportunity rather than a test. Maya understood that she needed to bring not just her technical skills, but her whole self to the performance. The mysterious man's lullaby had somehow opened a door to her own emotional truth, giving her access to depths she hadn't known existed. As she continued to practice, Maya found herself wondering about the stranger's story. Who was the precious person he had written the lullaby for? What circumstances had led to their separation? The sadness in his voice suggested a loss that went beyond ordinary heartbreak, something that had shaped his understanding of music's power to carry love across impossible distances. The morning's encounter had planted seeds of curiosity that would grow throughout the day. Maya sensed that meeting the gentle stranger was just the beginning of something larger, though she couldn't yet imagine what that might be. All she knew was that the melody he had shared continued to sing in her heart, transforming her understanding of what it meant to be a musician.